Hello and welcome to CANNAMAntv. My name is Connor McLeod. In this very informative episode, I speak with the founder of SativaLearning, Ryan Mccreanor. In this episode, we discuss Ryan's background and the path that led him to his current role in the cannabis industry, misconceptions in the cannabis industry, what the UK can learn from the Canadian cannabis industry, and what SativaLearning is and what it hopes to achieve in the future. Make sure and like and subscribe, and join me on Patreon, where for £3 a month, you can help to build a stronger cannabis media platform. Now then, let's talk cannabis. Before we dive into SativaLearning and some of the writings that you've been done, could you give a wee background on yourself and how you got to this stage in your career?
Yeah, sure. So I studied biomedical science at university and afterwards went on to work as a toxicology scientist.
Right.
And the company I worked for, they created testing kits to test for drugs of abuse. So I was involved with the kind of designer drugs panel. So that was things like bath salts and other legal highs. And part of that was synthetic cannabis.
Right.
So you probably heard of Spice and
Yeah.
K2 that were, these were quite prevalent in the media and causing serious issues to those that, that consumed them. So that together we created one of the first tests for synthetic cannabinoids in the world, which tested for, rather than THC, you were testing for what was called JWH compounds.
Right.
So that was kind of my first introduction to, I suppose, the testing side of drugs and cannabis. So did that for a few years, and following that, didn't do too much of note, just a bit of traveling, but I ended up living in Vancouver.
Right.
And out there in Canada, I was, at the time I was working as a recruitment consultant, and we were recruiting for a lot of cannabis roles. There was, I kept seeing companies popping up in the cannabis space. They were just on the brink of legalizing adult use federally.
Right.
And I just thought it'd be a great time to get back into the industry. I thought, seeing the opportunity to get into an industry that's in its infancy and it's going to be booming over the next few years. And it would be a good experience for me to come back to Belfast and kind of use that experience to start something myself. So I managed to get a job with the government of British Columbia. Started off pretty much in a call center, taking calls from the public to do with everything to do with the kind of rollout of recreational cannabis in Canada. So you could be answering calls on anything to do with cannabis, from older people wanting to try it to the first time to people, complaining about how the shift from the gray market to the legal market and having their dispensary shut down and a lack of government stores. It could, really just purely education based over the phone. And from there, I moved into a team lead position within the operations, and finally a training role where I would travel around British Columbia. Everywhere there was a government cannabis dispensary opening up, I would head out and train the staff on basically everything to do with cannabis, how to talk to the public about cannabis, how to guide them to the right products, and just better advise them on safe consumption as well. And yeah, did that for a couple of years, and finally it was time to move home. So that's when I moved back to Belfast and set up SativaLearning at the beginning of 2020.
Right. Before we dive into that, and I mean that sounds extremely fun. Like sitting talking about cannabis every single day, that sounds great. I mean, what was before we talk about SativaLearning, what was would you say the most prevalent criticism that you were getting over the phone when there was this transition going on? I mean, I'm assuming that this was it was on an economic basis as well. There weren't shops in play, and then there was this difficulty transitionally.
Yeah, so at the time in Vancouver, it was a really interesting time to be there. I arrived in about 2017, and the grey market was flourishing. So it was called the grey market because, there was about 100 stores around Vancouver, all operating illegally, but they were considered a low priority by the police. So they were actually given business licenses by the city of Vancouver. They had to meet certain business requirements and zoning requirements and things like that. But the actual sale of cannabis still remained illegal. and that's what people have been used to for so long. So that once full legalization came into play, those started to get shut down. There was a lot of raids, and those grey market dispensaries were shut down. And at the time, the government only had one government store open in British Columbia. So there was a lot of complaints about a lack of access. People, obviously, medical patients had been using the kind of grey market to get their medicine. And there was a lot of complaints around that, but more specifically on the products, I would say, I always remember it was the three P's: pricing, packaging, and product quality were kind of the three biggest complaints that we had at the time. So price wise, you could be going into a grey market dispensary, and you would have discounted purchases. The more you buy, the heavier the discount, whereas that really didn't exist in the legal market. I think the maximum you could purchase in terms of packaging was 15 grams, and that didn't come with discount. Whereas, you could be, if you were buying an ounce on the legal market, or sorry, the grey market, you could get quite a bit of discount there. So that was an issue. Packaging, we went from where you would go into a grey market store, all of the bud was laid out in big glass containers, and the bud tender, you could put your face in the jar and have a good sniff and have a look at the product and see what it was like before you purchased. But in the legal market, and when you purchased as well, it would just be put into a small kind of plastic bag. Not too much waste comes with that, but when they legalized, everything came pre-packaged from the licensed producers.
Right.
So rather than your experience going into a legal store is a lot different from the grey market store. So you weren't able to kind of get a real good feel for the product, a good look at it. They did have these sniff pods, but they were terrible. You couldn't
even the name sounds like sniff pod. That's ridiculous.
Yeah. So yeah, the packaging kit, it had to come, the Health Canada guidelines, it had to come in child resistant packaging, big plastic containers for, even if you're just buying a gram or 3.5 grams, it was pretty chunky containers they were coming in. And especially if you then, if you're used to purchasing, quite high amounts of cannabis, the packaging that you'd be producing from that. And, those were then plastic containers boxed up, and if you got it delivered in a box again. So it was very, very excessive. And what was the last one? The quality then. So product quality was not on par with the grey markets or the black market, legacy market, whatever you want to call it. Consumers were used to a fairly high standard of product quality, and I think the stuff that we were seeing coming through was quite dry. They were small buds. They didn't have a great smell to them. And I think in a lot of cases, they'd been sitting in a warehouse for quite a long time because they were due to legalize quite a few months before that. And that may have been the issues there. I have been told, now I haven't been there since the end of 2019. So it's coming up on I suppose 2 years. But I have been told that all of those, apart from the packaging, have improved. The price has started to come down quite a bit, and the quality has started to improve. So I would like to see them move towards more sustainable packaging. And I don't see any reason why hemp plastic cannot be the solution there as well.
It certainly was extremely fitting if that was the case. I mean, what happened to all the grey licensed producers then when this transition happened over? They just come all government-based dispensaries, and then the grey ones had to either go away or face prosecution?
So some of them, some of them were shut down. I wouldn't be 100% on the ins outs of it, but I know a lot of them did transition to legal stores. So the way the government operated, there was 3 channels of sales. So you would have online sales, it's all government run. So they have a kind of monopoly on sales. Licensed producers like Afria, Tilray, Aurora, all their product would be sent to one distribution center.
Right.
And from there, it would go out 3 channels, either online sales, which is the government website, BC Cannabis Stores. You can go on, purchase whatever you want, and it'll get delivered to you by Canada Post. Or else the government stores, which was the stores that I helped to train the staff for. So they all were government-run stores. And then there was the private stores, and they had to purchase wholesale from government as well. So they did have a monopoly on cannabis distribution. But yeah, a lot of those grey market stores would have had to pay the kind of fees to become legal, although I think the majority of them were shut down in the end.
So what was the training like when you had to train the staff in order to engage with the public? I mean, was there a standard protocol for everybody?
Yeah, but basically, we were given kind of a teaching program to abide by, and the team that we were involved with, we helped to put together a lot of the cannabis content for that as well. Now, looking back on it with the knowledge I have now, it's at the time, and I've said this before, I thought it was world-class cannabis education that I was giving out, but looking back, we were just providing the same old information that most cannabis stores will provide in terms of, these are your indica dominant products, and you can expect, a sedating effect from indicas. These are your sativa dominant products, and they'll be more energizing, when really that's not the case. And it's, it took for me to kind of move away from that and educate myself to realize that that's outdated information and not the best way to be guiding consumers towards a product. And I know firsthand there's nothing worse than going into a dispensary and have a bud tender tell you that this is a very strong indica and it's going to help you sleep, and then you're sitting at 2:00 in the morning cursing their name.
Yeah, I know the hybrid was omitted in that context,
Yeah.
But yes, I mean, you briefly touched on it there, Ryan, about the ambiguity between indica and sativa, and the reality is there's not really an indica sativa, there's a cannabinoid profile. Could you touch on that? Because I mean, you mentioned that in your Misconceptions article, where you touch on CBD and sativa and indica as well.
Yeah, so I mean, I think that's what people have been used to for so long, just indica sativa hybrids, and we now know that it doesn't make much sense. Indica and sativa are terms used to describe the morphology of the plant, the shape and structure of the leaves and the height of the plant. And they have no bearing on the expected effects of the consumer. So the best knowledge at the minute tells us that the cannabinoid and terpene profiles are a better indicator of how a product may affect you. So just as an example, then, a product that's maybe high in myrcene is likely to give you a more sedating effect, whereas, a terpene like limonene can have more of an energizing effect. But you have to take into consideration the full chemical profile of the cultivar in question. And that's not, that's more difficult for consumers to understand. Saying indica and sativa is very easy for them. It makes sense, but it's kind of, it doesn't lead them down the right path to finding a product that works for them. Then we also have to consider, your set and setting, your mindset and your surroundings. And I suppose an example, for your mindset, if you're severely anxious and you're worried about something, a high THC product is maybe not the best thing for you to be consuming, especially if you're new to cannabis. A very high THC can be anxiety inducing. THC works in a biphasic manner, meaning low and high doses can produce kind of opposite effects. We know very low doses of THC can be very beneficial medically and help to alleviate anxiety, whereas high doses of THC can cause paranoia and anxiety. And that's one of the main issues I have with prohibition at the minute, because all you can get is skunk, very, very high THC cannabis, and which can cause problems for people. So there's that. And then I suppose on the setting side, you would hear people coming in and saying, I don't know, maybe going to a concert, we're going to this, we're going to, whatever they were planning that day. I would always advise, it's best to consume cannabis, especially if you're new to it, be surrounded by people you're comfortable with, be in a comfortable environment. If you're going to be up front at a concert and smoking cannabis for the first time, might not be the best time to experience it. Again, that could be, could cause issues and cause some anxiety for some people. And finally, then on that, we have to consider that everyone's endocannabinoid system is unique. You and I could consume the same cultivar of cannabis and have very different experiences of that. And an example I like to use of that is just to show how cannabis can affect us so differently. Do you know what? That's the question. What is medical cannabis prescribed for most? Would you know what it's prescribed for in most cases?
I would guess, but it will be a wrong guess, at chronic pain. But is it correct?
Yeah, that would be
Hey,
one of the most prevalent ones. But I'm a very interesting case in that if I'm in pain and I consume cannabis, it increases the pain massively. And this is, I've looked into, there's very, very little research on this. It happens to very few people. I talked to Professor Barnes about this before. He thinks it's less than 1%. And it just goes to show you that, we can all be affected very differently by cannabis. Everyone's endocannabinoid system is different. So I've had the unfortunate event of a knee surgery and consuming cannabis after, and it intensified the pain immensely. And I've had back issues where, I had to refrain from consuming cannabis for the same reason. And I've met, I think, 2 people with the same issue before. So just goes to show you how we can all be affected very differently. So all of that combined is a much different conversation as a bud tender or a cannabis consultant to talk to someone coming in. So I would like to see the dispensaries move away from the indica sativa model, but it's very difficult for them. It's easy to market that way. It's simple for the consumer, but at the end of the day, it doesn't help. And we need to start looking at the most up-to-date information and trying to work off that, as difficult as it may be.
Quite interesting that the direction that would be potentially taken then, and the description between the person coming in to buy the product and the individual that's educating them based on it. Because you mentioned it earlier there as well, which it'd be good if you could actually describe for individuals that are unaware of the difference between a chemovar and a cultivar, because this is obviously crucial importance when it comes to the cannabinoid profile of the products you're consuming.
Yeah, so most people will be familiar with the term strain. So strain isn't necessarily correct, and kind of it's more used in, I believe, virology and to describe the likes of viruses. But a cultivar just stands for cultivated variety. So just to give you an example of any, let's say sour diesel is a cultivar of cannabis. It's cultivated for its psychoactive properties, whereas trying to think of a finola is a hemp cultivar cultivated for its seed or fiber. So that's why we would use to distinguish between cultivars, whereas chemovar takes into consideration the chemical profile of the plant based on THC, CBD ratios and terpene profiles as well. So chemovar is very important when you're describing medical cannabis. As a patient would need to know that they're getting the consistent ratios of cannabinoids or terpenes as well.
Excellent description, Ryan. It's one of the things as well that, what do you see most apparent then as a transitional thing? So obviously the UK is different from Canada, obviously, but it's the same. And the fact is that cannabis will become new. And that's the thing when it comes to the industry being factors. So, what do you see as the most difficult element that's going to be present in the UK when it inevitably does the transition?
I think it's going to be education again, 100%. Yeah, even though the difference is BC, British Columbia is famous for cannabis. It's just above California. It's BC bud is well known around the world, and there was a very, very well established market before they fully legalized for adult use. And they've also had a medical cannabis program from 2001, I believe it is. They've had a few revisions. So very, very different here in the UK because we now have a really robust CBD industry, which is very, very different. We don't have a gray market cannabis industry as they did, but we have a CBD industry. So I think the public are coming around to the idea of cannabis in a different way. They're starting to see the health benefits of it before anything else. And I think that's starting to reduce stigma quite a bit. You know, a lot of people are gaining benefit from CBD. There's 1.4 million people in the UK using cannabis for medical purposes. So I just think there's going to be a very slow kind of dissolving of the stigma of cannabis here. But it seems to be sort of ignored by politicians at the minute. It's, you know, they haven't really tackled the problem head on. And I think that's something that needs to happen very soon. Otherwise, what might happen from I suppose a kind of medical perspective is we're going to see more clinics opening up. There's a handful of clinics in the UK at the minute. I believe Scotland had its first one there was it last month or the?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, it's in Stirling. Yeah.
Yeah, still waiting on one in Northern Ireland, but hopefully soon. And I think what you'll see is the more clinics start to open, the price of a private prescription will go down. More people will be consuming cannabis. The kind of taboo will dissolve with that. And if the government don't tackle it head on, we'll get to the stage where you know, anybody can be walking into a clinic and buying very affordable private prescription cannabis. And I don't think that's the way it should happen, but that's what could happen if they don't, you know, look at legalizing cannabis soon.
I think it'd be like impressive ignorance if they didn't use cannabis to fix the economy, or at least contribute in a positive way towards the economy, because we're in poor state of affairs at the moment.
Oh, absolutely. And I think the report that Maple Tree and Mackerel solicitors put together, the 10 recommendations for government, in that report, you know, they state that there could be 97,000 jobs produced from a robust medical cannabis industry. It could be worth over 2 billion. And that's just on the medical side. When we take into consideration adult use, you know, just the job creation, the money that can be generated from tax revenue. We've seen it in multiple states in the US and as well as across Canada. It is time that there was a more serious conversation had.
Yeah, that was a really impressive report that got put through, because it's one of the things, I think it was recommendation 7, when they recommended that or there's 2 recommendations actually that was relating to the medical side. One of them, obviously most of them was, but one of them was that the CBD companies will have some form of leeway when they're describing medical benefit. Obviously it won't be in the same credibility as a general practitioner, but it'll still be something, whereas they completely avoid talking about that medically. And the other one was the fact that GPs will be more readily available to prescribe. And both of these things would immediately, like you mentioned, create a huge surge in education, because then everybody can get away from the elephant in the room that this is a medical product as well as a dietary supplement, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. Couldn't agree more. And it is a shame that GPs aren't able to prescribe. You know, they're obviously in the perfect position to do so. But I mean, one of the big problems at the minute with that is the NICE guidelines are far too restrictive.
Yeah.
You know, they've looked at cannabis as a pharmaceutical product. And they believe they only recommend 3 isolate-based products at the minute, and up until very recently, they did not recommend full-spectrum products.
Right.
Meaning that, you know, although at the minute you have to be on the GMC specialist register, they're hesitant to go against the guidelines. So that's one of the big issues, with the NICE guidelines being so restrictive. And then the next issue with that is education. You know, even if a doctor was willing to prescribe cannabis, education is lacking. You know, they don't receive any education through medical school or through their continuing training. So in most cases, what you're seeing is patients coming to a doctor more well-informed than the doctor. And I don't think they like that very much.
It's a very bizarre dynamic. I really don't think this will ever happen ever again. I think there'll be a lot of instances that's going on in real time that we're all experiencing, that in 20 years' time, we will be talking about it in a very nostalgic, potentially negative light, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, couldn't agree more. Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it's very, very unusual times, to say the least. So yeah, I mean, SativaLearning then, Ryan, I mean, what was it that really pushed you through for starting this?
Yeah, so obviously, I had the background in cannabis education in Canada. I knew I wanted to do something with that when I came home. I wasn't too sure what that was going to be. And to be honest, I didn't realize how big the CBD industry was when I did come home. It is booming, it's flourishing at the minute. But I was very disappointed with the information and the education I seen online. A lot of the companies at the minute selling CBD were giving out kind of incorrect information. There were reports released showing, that across the world, not just in the UK, in the US and in Italy, UK as well, that a lot of the most popular products available on the market, their advertised CBD content was differed notably from the actual content inside. So I knew I wanted to bring some formalized, credible education to the industry, and that's why we started SativaLearning. So it's an education platform for the cannabis industry. We aim to bring experts in the field together to create the most trusted educational content for those that are in the industry, as well as those that see the potential in the industry and want to join. So at the minute, we've got one course available. It's our CBD industry professional course. And it takes you through a comprehensive overview of everything to do with the CBD industry. We start, with the history. We talk about the cannabis plant, plant chemistry, the endocannabinoid system, how CBD is extracted, some post-harvest processes, some of the most common products available on the market, product quality, bioavailability, what to look for in a COA, sorry, a certificate of analysis for anybody that doesn't know. And then we also have a legal module, which we have reviewed and approved by macro solicitors. We wanted to make sure we're constantly given the most up-to-date information.
Right.
And we've also had the course accredited by the Continuing Professional Development Service as well. So that's the course that we have at the minute. We've had fantastic feedback on that. And we're now working with the Medical Cannabis Clinician Society,
right,
to create a more medical cannabis focused course designed to give doctors confidence in prescribing cannabis-based medicines. So this is in production at the minute. What we've done is identified the 10 most prevalent conditions where cannabis is prescribed. And you've probably heard of the MCCS before, but they're pioneers in the UK, the first group of doctors currently prescribing cannabis-based medicines. And each of the doctors is going to take a specific module on whether it's anxiety, fibromyalgia, chronic pain, whatever else, and we're going to produce modules for doctors, so just to try to fill that education need.
Excellent. That's really exciting, Ryan, and it's very much necessary because we are dealing with this huge void. When you mentioned that earlier, that GPs would be hesitant even with the availability that they can prescribe, 100% agree, because this is what we're dealing with. You are going into a situation where even though they're not inhibited to give obviously the medicine over, they would still be hesitant because the knowledge is absent. So they might have the same rhetoric, the same buzzwords that appear in their head, gateway drug, psychosis, all these different things that inevitably inhibit the medicine being given. You mentioned it a minute ago about the law aspects of the course through macro solicitors. Is this for individuals starting a CBD company or individuals trying to essentially navigate the legal framework in the industry?
It's a bit of both. It's very difficult for us to tailor back the amount of information we give out. We obviously can't be seen as giving out official legal advice,
of course,
of the course. So we've covered within that module, we cover international EU and UK law on CBD, and we have that updated every 3 months by macro solicitors. So any changes that come across, obviously the novel foods deadline just passed there. So we had the course updated to reflect the recent changes. So we go quite in depth into everything you'd need to know, even if you were looking to start a new business. But we wouldn't go into so much detail as to tell you how to fill in your novel foods application.
There'll be a lot of people watching this like, we're getting there. Yeah, no,
Exactly.
that's really exciting, Ryan. Let's see, I think we've essentially covered most of what I was to talk about. Do you have anything you'd like to add before we get going?
No, that's all. If anybody wants to have a look at us, it's SativaLearning.com, and I think it's Sativa Learning on most social media platforms. And just thanks to you, Connor, for doing your bit and spreading the word. And I've seen you've had quite a few great guests on, which is really good to see. And I've been seeing your comics as well going up on
Excellent.
LinkedIn. I've been enjoying those. So thanks for that.
Excellent. Delighted. I really appreciate that, Ryan. That's great to know. Because lastly, I'm sitting laughing when I'm drawing them, man. So to think that other people are doing the same, that's great. I really appreciate that.
No,
So
that's brilliant. Yeah, I haven't seen anybody else doing that in the industry, so it's very different, but it's a nice change of pace.
Thanks to Ryan for giving me his time, and thanks to you for sticking around until the end of the video. I sincerely hope you enjoyed the content. I'll see you next time.